The shattering of the floor-to-ceiling glass was not a crack or a splinter. It was a detonation. A concussive blast of noise that ripped through the quiet, steam-filled air of the roasted bean, instantly transforming the haven of artisanal coffee into a war zone. A massive, fur-covered body, easily 300 pounds of muscle and rage, was the projectile. It slammed through the window, taking the entire frame with it, and skidded across the polished concrete floor, overturning a table of organic pastries and sending a shower of croissant crumbs and latte foam into the air. Screams erupted. A deluge of panic. The barista, a young woman with a nose ring, dropped a ceramic mug, which shattered into 1,000 pieces. A man in a tweed jacket dove behind a plush armchair. A toddler began to wail. The air, once rich with the scent of roasted beans and vanilla, now smelled of wet fur, ozone, and the acrid tang of freshly spilt coffee. Through the jagged, spider-webbed remains of the window, a man stepped. He was a colossal figure, a mountain of tailored black wool and pure, lethal intent. His bespoke suit, a masterpiece of Savile Row precision, was dark as a moonless night, stretched taut over shoulders that seemed to strain the very fabric. His face was a study in savage, hard-edged beauty, a sharp jaw, a straight nose, and eyes that blazed with a molten gold that was distinctly, terrifyingly inhuman. Dark, tousled hair fell across his brow. This was Silas, and his presence was like a physical force, a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure that made the survivors in the cafe clutch their chests. His gaze was fixed on the groaning beast on the floor. The rogue werewolf was attempting to rise, its snout bloody, its claws gouging deep furrows into the concrete as it scrabbled for purchase. It was a monster, a hulking mass of gray fur and yellowed fangs. It was also dying. That much was clear from the way its breath came in rattling, wet gasps. Silas moved with a speed that defied his size. In a single fluid motion, he crossed the distance. He didn't speak. He just lifted a heavy, gleaming leather Oxford shoe and planted it firmly on the creature's chest, pinning it to the floor. The pressure was immense, a slow, deliberate crushing. The beast's claws scraped uselessly at the fine leather of his shoe. Silas looked down at the dying rogue, a flicker of profound, ancient disdain in his molten eyes. Then, with the finality of a door slamming shut, he pressed down. There was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage, and the rogue went limp, its head lolling to the side, a final huff of air escaping its massive lungs. In the deafening silence that followed the crack, a new, incongruous sound filled the space. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tick, 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 tick. Evelyn had not moved. She was seated at her corner table, the one with the best vantage point of the door and the power outlet. A half-empty latte, now a brown puddle mingling with fine white dust from the exploded ceiling tile, soaked the sleeve of her affordable but flawlessly tailored navy blazer. A coating of drywall grit clung to her glossy, dark hair. Her anti-blue light glasses were askew on her nose, yet her posture remained ramrod straight, her expression not one of shock, but of cold, simmering fury. She was a porcelain doll sitting in the epicenter of an earthquake, wholly unimpressed by the tectonic forces at play. She was tapping her index finger on the wooden tabletop, counting. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, darted to the source of the chaotic entrance, the shattered window, the debris. A brief, almost imperceptible frown touched her lips. She extended a hand, picking up her phone from where it had been knocked to the table. The screen was a mosaic of hairline fractures, the protective glass doing little to hide the spiderweb of cracks. She swiped up. It was unresponsive. She swiped again, harder. Nothing. The home button, the volume rocker, all dead. A low, dangerous sound, a near growl of utter professional affront, escaped her perfectly glossed lips. Her focus then shifted to a small, white, cylindrical object lying near the puddle of latte. Her wireless earbud, the right one, floating in a sea of overpriced oat milk. She plucked it from the mess, holding it up to the light. Water damage. The LED was dark. Tick. Her finger tapped the table again. 5 seconds. That was 5 seconds of interrupted productivity. An unquantifiable loss of efficiency. An absolute catastrophe. Silas, having dealt with his immediate problem, was now scanning the room. His gaze was a scythe, and it cut through the terrified humans cowering in corners, cringing behind chairs. The fear they radiated was a pleasing, intoxicating perfume. His eyes finally landed on the corner table. On her. On the beautiful, unflappable woman meticulously dabbing at the dust on her blazer with a napkin, completely ignoring the corpse of a supernatural creature just 8 feet from her. His brow furrowed. The fear emanating from her was not just minimal. It was non-existent. It was like trying to smell water in an ocean. He took a step towards her, his shoes crunching on the glass. A man in a cheap, brown suit, clearly a mid-level pack subordinate, appeared at Silas's elbow, trembling violently. He held out a pristine white handkerchief. "AlphaKing, sir, your hands. You have a little—" Silas didn't even look at him. He backhanded the man's offering, sending the handkerchief fluttering to the floor. The man immediately bowed his head, shrinking away into the terrified crowd of pack members who had materialized at the broken entrance, forming a circle of black-suited, quaking wolves. They were all watching her. They were all watching a human woman, a slip of a thing covered in dust and coffee, with expressions of utter disbelief. Evelyn ignored them all. She reached into her patent leather satchel, a sensible, structured bag from an outlet mall, and withdrew a small, spiral-bound notepad and a tasteful silver pen. She flipped it open to a fresh page. Her writing was sharp, precise, and ruthless. Time of incident, 09:47:23 a.m. She noted it with a glance at the non-functional analog clock on the wall, which had stopped after the blast. She estimated. Location, the Roasted Bean, 12 Main Street, Crest Haven. Window, wall to wall, floor to ceiling. Estimated cost of replacement, $3,800 minimum, including specialized tempered glass and expedited installation. She looked at her phone again, a sleek but affordable model. She wrote, "Mobile device compromised. Fair market replacement value, $479.99. She looked at the earbud. Wireless earbud, destroyed. Replacement cost, $89.99. The sound of her pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the cafe, other than the occasional muffled sob. Silas was now standing directly in front of her table. He cast a shadow that engulfed her and the entire corner. He was accustomed to people looking up at him with awe, terror, or desperate pleading. This woman was looking at a ledger. "Look at me," he snarled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. Evelyn didn't look up. She was making a note of her jacket. Dry cleaning. Specialty. She'd have to go to the one 2 blocks over, which would waste another 45 minutes. She wrote, "Lost billable hours. 2.5 hours, initial incident. 1 hour, dry cleaning detour. 1.5 hours, phone purchase and setup. AV5 earbud replacement." She was already calculating her hourly rate, the compound loss of her morning project, and the sheer inconvenience. Her calculations were interrupted by the smell of him. He smelled expensive. A clean, masculine scent of cedar and something wild, like ozone before a storm. It was a tiny, insignificant detail in the face of his monumental breach of conduct. "You," Silas snarled again, leaning down, his face inches from hers. The heat of his body was suffocating. His gold eyes were blazing, demanding a reaction, a submission. Evelyn finally looked up. Her hazel eyes, magnified by her slightly cracked glasses, were clear and unflinching. She saw a dangerously handsome man, his jaw tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. She saw the blood on his knuckles, the fleck of gray fur on his otherwise immaculate lapel. She saw only a disruption. "Yes," she stated, her voice flat, cool, and utterly without tremor. You. The word hung in the air, a simple, factual confirmation. It was as if she were acknowledging a stain on her carpet. You are the owner of the black SUV with the license plate OBS X1 illegally parked in the fire lane, right? She gestured with her pen towards the shattered window. Through it, one could see a sleek, armored black Suburban, its engine idling. A man in a black suit was standing by the rear door, his face pale. Silas blinked. The question was so far removed from what he had been expecting, a scream, a plea, a feint, that it momentarily short-circuited his brain. The muscle in his jaw ticked again. The owner of the vehicle, yes or no? Evelyn pressed, her tone clipped. Yes, he growled, the admission dragged from him through sheer confusion. Good. Your rogue, she said, gesturing dismissively at the dead wolf on the floor, is your problem. Your unauthorized demolition of this establishment is mine. Who is your insurer? Silas's eyes widened. A low growl started deep in his chest. A trickle of power, a wave of pure dominance rolled off him. A pack member behind him whimpered and fell to his knees. The air grew thick, oppressive. It was a psychic pressure meant to force a weaker being to the ground. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are demanding insurance information? Yes. Your liability is clear and extensive, Evelyn said, completely unaffected. She didn't flinch. Her heart didn't race. Her breathing was even. She could feel the pressure, but it was just another ambient nuisance, like loud music from a neighboring apartment. Her mind was a fortress of spreadsheets and billing codes, and his little psychic tantrum couldn't get past the firewalls. She looked him dead in the eye and tapped her notepad. I need your full name, corporate entity, and a contact number for your risk management department. Silas stared at her. The sheer, unadulterated audacity. This human, this small, fragile thing that he could break in half with a sneeze, was treating him like a minor traffic violator. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the cold, predatory grin of a wolf who had found a particularly intriguing and infuriatingly unafraid piece of prey. I am Silas, he said, the name a pronouncement, a title. And you do not speak to me of risk management. Your name. Last name is not required at this juncture, but I will need your corporate details, Evelyn said, her pen poised over the page. And a credit card for the down payment on the replacement window. He remained silent, his golden eyes boring into her. Evelyn sighed, a sound of pure, weary irritation. She looked at the cracked phone on the table, then back at the towering, lethal man. I am going to have to invoice you for the entire sum personally, aren't I? She said it as if it were the greatest possible personal tragedy, a moral failing on his part. This is incredibly inefficient. I am a junior auditor, not a collections agent. My time is not meant for chasing down construction liability. She said the words construction liability with a special venom, as if they were a personal insult. She stood up, a fluid, graceful movement that brought her to her full height, which was still only level with his chest. She closed her notepad and, with a swift, decisive motion, thrust it against the solid wall of his chest, pressing the paper directly against the fine wool of his bespoke suit. This is your liability, she stated, her voice ringing with cold authority. The window, my mobile device, my earbud, my blazer, and the loss of my billable hours. I will provide you with an itemized invoice within 24 hours. She took a step back and brushed a final piece of drywall dust from her shoulder. You have my email address. I will require payment within 30 days. Late fees will accrue at 18% per annum on the outstanding balance after the due date. She grabbed her satchel, slung it over her shoulder, and began to walk towards the shattered window, weaving around the carnage. The pack members parted for her as if she were a ghost, their mouths agape. She paused, just for a moment, at the jagged edge of the ruined window. looked back at the man who was still frozen in place, a notepad mark pressed into the heart of his flawless suit. "I will be expecting your corporate information," she added. "And next time you need to dispose of a feral animal, please do it in a designated area. There are bylaws." With that, she stepped out into the crisp Cresthaven morning, her heels clicking with an authoritative finality on the sidewalk. She didn't look back. The city was moving. People were going to work. The morning was proceeding. The world hadn't ended. It was just deeply, unforgivably inconvenient. She pulled out her dead phone, sighed again, and began the mental process of budgeting for its replacement, a new earbud, and the dry cleaning bill. A voice from behind her, a low, predatory snarl, cut through the city noise. "What is your name?" Evelyn stopped. Without turning around, she called back, her voice as crisp and sharp as the shattered glass at her feet. "Evelyn, I am the auditor who will be charging you for the damages." She resumed walking, her heels a steady, rhythmic beat on the pavement, a counterpoint to the chaos she was leaving in her wake. She was already mentally composing the invoice. The subject line would read, "R.E. Unauthorized demolition and incident at the Roasted Bean." It was the only appropriate response to a situation of such monumental and financially impactful disorder. The sharp, aggressive clacking of a mechanical keyboard was the only sound in Evelyn's dimly lit apartment. It was a sacred rhythm, a percussive beat of justice and order in a world that had, that morning, devolved into chaos. The cracked phone lay on the corner of her desk, a testament to the day's atrocity. The destroyed earbud sat in a small evidence baggie, like a crime scene exhibit. But Evelyn was not a detective. She was an auditor, and her weapon of choice was the cross-reference. Her fingers flew across the keys, a blur of precise movements. On her primary monitor, she had the City of Cresthaven's business license database open. On her secondary monitor, she was trawling through the state's Secretary of State corporate filings. On her third, a glorified tablet, she had the photo of the black SUV's license plate, OBS X1, blown up to high resolution. "OBS," she muttered to herself, her voice a low, focused hum. "Obsidian. Obsidian Holdings. Obsidian Consulting. Obsidian Capital." The variations were endless, the corporate veils deliberate. She typed OBS X1 into a private vehicle registration database she had access to through a previous client's fleet management audit. A hit. The plate was registered to a holding company called Darkstone Enterprises. She clicked on the link. Darkstone Enterprises was a subsidiary of Shadowmare Group, which was, in turn, a fully owned entity of Obsidian Holdings, LLC. A thin, satisfied smile touched her lips. She loved the smell of a paper trail in the morning. It smelled like liability. She pulled up the articles of incorporation for Obsidian Holdings. The registered agent was a law firm in the city, Sterling, Vance & Croft. She scribbled the address on a Post-it note. The principal officer was listed as 1 Silas Blackwood. No middle initial, no phone number, just a P.O. box in a swanky part of town. "You think a P.O. box can hide you from me, Mr. Blackwood?" she whispered, typing the name into a public records search. Nothing. The man was a ghost, a digital void, but that was fine. She didn't need his life story. She needed his financial information. She pulled up a credit reporting database. She was a junior auditor, but her firm, Keller Price & Associates, had premium access. She typed in the name and the P.O. box. A hit. A single hit. A corporate credit account with a limit so astronomical it made her pause, her finger hovering over the M key. It had a 7-figure limit for miscellaneous operational expenses. The word miscellaneous made her eye twitch. That was an accountant's nightmare, a black hole of untraceable funds. She made a mental note to suggest a forensic audit of that account if she ever had the chance. She navigated back to the city's zoning and building permits database. She found the permit for the roasted beans window installation. She recorded the permit number, the contractor's name, and the estimated replacement cost. She then calculated the standard markup for expedited work, the fee for an after-hours install, and a small hazardous materials disposal surcharge for the removal of the werewolf's, as she termed it in her notes, biological residue. Her fingers were a blur again, this time typing out the invoice. She formatted it with the precision of a master craftsman, using a clean, sans serif font. The header read, Invoice, Incident at the Roasted Bean, Unauthorized Demolition and Liability. She itemized with meticulous cruelty. Line item 1, Unauthorized Exterior Demolition, Floor-to-Ceiling Glass Unit, Frame and Installation. Estimate from Cresthaven Glass Co. Permit Tashtart C, $22.89. Quantity, 1 unit. Unit price, $3,895. Total, 3 collar, $895, tine anan. Line item 2, Commercial Cleaning and Hazardous Material Disposal. Specialized services for organic residue removal. Quantity, 1 service. Unit price, $450. Total, $450, tine anan. Line item 3, Personal property damage, mobile device. Cracked screen, internal water damage from latte spill. Quantity, 1 unit. Unit price, $479.99. Total, $479, tine 99. Line item 4, Personal property damage, wireless earbud. Oat milk immersion, irreparable damage. Quantity, 1 unit. Unit price, $89.99. Total, $89, tine 99. Line item 5, Personal property damage, professional blazer. Drywall dust, latte stain, deep cleaning required. Quantity, 1 garment. Unit price, $35. Total, $35.1. Line item 6, Lost billable hours. Time lost from primary project, 2.5 hours incident, 1 hour dry cleaning, 1.5 hours phone replacement, 0.75 hours earbud replacement equals 5.75 hours at 87.50 cents per hour. Quantity, 575 hours. Unit price, $87.50. Total, $503.13. Line item 7, Emotional distress and lost productivity fee, non-negotiable. Quantity, 1 incident. Unit price, $200. Total, $200.1. Subtotal, $5.653.10. Sales tax, 8.25%, $466.38. Total due, $119.48. At the bottom, in bold, underlined text, she added her pièce de résistance. Payment terms, net 30. Late fee, 5% of the outstanding balance will be applied for every 30-day period the invoice remains unpaid. This invoice is a legally binding document. Any disputes must be submitted in writing within 15 days of receipt. She printed it out on heavy watermark paper. The crisp sound of the paper sliding out of the laser printer was deeply satisfying. She folded it with sharp, precise creases and slid it into a matching, high-quality business envelope. She addressed it to Silas Blackwood, care of Obsidian Holdings, P.O. Box 717, Cresthaven, California 90210. She then sealed the flap with a decisive lick. She walked out of her apartment, down the creaking stairs, and into the late afternoon sun. The nearest mailbox was a blue metal box on the corner. She lifted the flap, dropped the envelope inside, and heard the soft thump of it hitting the pile of other, less important correspondence. The die was cast. The audit had begun. She turned and walked back to her apartment, already planning her follow-up email in 30 days. Meanwhile, in a penthouse that dominated the Cresthaven skyline, the atmosphere was thick, with something far more potent than tension. It was the smell of fear, and it was coming off the room's current occupants like a physical mist. The penthouse itself was an exercise in brutalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, the lights just beginning to flicker on in the twilight. The furniture was all sharp angles and dark leather, cold to the touch. A massive obsidian desk dominated the center of the main room, and behind it, sat Silas, the supreme AlphaKing of the West Coast, nursing a glass of single malt scotch. He was not alone. 6 of his most powerful lieutenants were arrayed before him, a collection of massive, terrifying men in impeccably tailored suits. They were the apex predators of the West Coast, creatures who commanded fear and respect from thousands of wolves. Each of them could tear a human in half with their bare hands, and every single one of them was sweating. "AlphaKing," rumbled Marcus, a bear of a man with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, his voice barely a whisper. "The rogue's body has been disposed of. The cafe's owner has been paid off. All witnesses have been compensated for their silence." Silas swirled his scotch, the ice clinking softly. "And the woman?" A collective shudder ran through the room. Marcus swallowed hard. "She left. We don't know who she is. She just walked out." "Walked out?" Silas's voice was flat, dangerous. "She walked out of a scene where I killed a rogue, covered in blood and debris. And you let her walk out?" "She was a civilian, AlphaKing," another lieutenant, a leaner man named Vance, offered nervously. We couldn't just take her. The humans. The police would be involved." Silas's golden eyes narrowed. Before he could respond, a soft, hesitant knock came from the door to the penthouse. It was a tentative, almost apologetic sound, incongruous in this room of raw power and fear. Everyone froze. Marcus looked at Silas, his expression one of pure terror. The knock came again. "Enter," Silas commanded, his voice a low snarl. The door creaked open, and a young wolf, barely more than a beta, his tie askew, shuffled into the room. He looked like he was walking to his own execution. In his trembling hands, he clutched a single, white business envelope. He didn't dare look up. His eyes were fixed on the floor. "AlphaKing," he stammered. This arrived. For you. In the mail." "In the mail?" Marcus barked, incredulous. "What is it?" I don't know, sir. It was addressed to you. Silas Blackwood, care of Obsidian Holdings." The beta held the envelope out, his hands shaking so violently the paper rustled. The mailroom didn't know what to do with it. It came through the regular postal service. The phrase, regular postal service, hung in the air like an obscenity. A supreme AlphaKing, the most powerful being on the West Coast, receiving a piece of regular mail. It was absurd. It was beneath him. It was an insult to his very station. Silas gestured with 2 fingers. "Give it to me." The beta practically threw the envelope onto the obsidian desk and scurried back out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The lieutenants all stared at the white envelope as if it were a bomb. Silas looked at it with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. He picked up a silver letter opener, a sharp, elegant blade, and slit the top. He pulled out the heavy, watermark paper, the crisp folds holding the promise of disaster. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the header. Invoice. The room was silent. The only sound was the faint rustling of the paper as Silas's eyes moved down the itemized list. A low growl started in his chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury, the kind of sound that preceded a rampage. The lieutenants braced themselves, expecting an explosion of violence. But then, something strange happened. As his eyes reached the bottom, the line for emotional distress and lost productivity fee, the growl stopped. His golden eyes flickered, not with rage, but with something else. Amusement. Cold, sharp, and utterly dangerous amusement. He read the total, 6/1/1948. He read the late fee clause. 5% of the outstanding balance will be applied for every 30-day period the invoice remains unpaid. He looked up at his terrified lieutenants. "An itemized invoice," he said, his voice a low, deadly purr. "For the window, for her phone, for her earbud, for her blazer." He paused, tapping the line for the lost billable hours with his finger. "For her time." Marcus was pale. "AlphaKing, I can have someone track her down. We can make this go away." "No," Silas said, the word a sharp command. He looked at the invoice again, the formal language, the precise calculations, the petty, hilarious inclusion of a service fee. "She sent me a bill. She crossed the city, found my corporate holding, my P.O. box, and she sent me a bill." He leaned back in his chair, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. It was the grin of a predator who had just caught the scent of the most intriguing prey he had ever encountered. "This woman," he said, his eyes glowing with a renewed, intense interest, "is not afraid of me. She is not afraid of my power, my title, or my reputation." "No one is that foolish, AlphaKing," Vance insisted. "She's probably some sort of federal agent. A plant." "She is an auditor," Silas stated, the word rolling off his tongue as if tasting it. He pointed to the header again. "Keller, Price and Associates, Junior Auditor. She lists her credentials. She wants me to pay her for the inconvenience of my existence." He laughed. It was a dark, rumbling sound that sent shivers down the spines of his lieutenants. It was the worst sound he could have made. It meant he was engaged. It meant he was hunting. "Send a runner to her firm," Silas commanded, his voice suddenly sharp. "I want her file on my desk by morning. I want to know everything. Her address, her bank balance, her lunch preferences. And bring me a checkbook." Marcus's jaw dropped. A checkbook, AlphaKing?" "Yes, Marcus. A checkbook." Silas's grin widened. "I am going to pay her invoice." He carefully folded the paper and placed it in his jacket pocket, over his heart. "I want to see her face when she realizes her debt collector is coming to collect her, on a much larger scale." The synchronized screeching of heavy tires on cheap asphalt was the first warning. It was a sound like a dozen metal claws dragging across the surface of the world. A brutal, jarring symphony that sliced through the quiet morning of Evelyn's rundown street. She was at her kitchen table, a modest two-seater with a chipped laminate top, pressing a bright red stamp onto a piece of heavy paper. Final notice. The ink was still wet. She had enclosed the second invoice, identical to the first, but with an added line item. Late fee, 30-day period, 5% of $6,119.48 equals $305.97. The new total was $6,425.45. She had also added a sternly worded cover letter, typed in the same crisp sans serif font, reminding Mr. Blackwood of his legal obligations and the impending escalation to a collections agency. She folded it with the same sharp, precise creases, slid it into the same high-quality envelope, and addressed it to the same P.O. box. The ritual was complete. She was just about to stand up and walk it to the mailbox when the screeching outside intensified, rising to a cacophony of squealing brakes and idling engines. Evelyn paused, her hand hovering over the envelope. She turned her head towards the window, her expression one of mild curiosity, as if she were investigating an unusual noise from a neighbor's apartment. She parted the cheap beige curtain with 2 fingers and peered down at the street. Her street. Her humble, pothole-ridden, tree-lined street that had never seen anything more exciting than a stray cat or a broken-down sedan. It was now a parking lot for the apocalypse. 10 black SUVs, identical in their menacing, armored bulk, had materialized from nowhere. They were parked with military precision, blocking both ends of the street, forming a solid wall of tinted glass and gleaming black metal. The vehicles were idling, their engines a low, throaty rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of her second-floor apartment. It was a sound of immense, contained power. Then the doors opened. Dozens of men in black suits spilled out. They moved with a terrifying, coordinated efficiency, their movements fluid and practiced. They fanned out across the sidewalk, their earpieces glinting in the morning sun. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a fire hydrant, pointed a sharp, decisive finger at a man walking his poodle. The man froze, his face draining of color. Another suited figure gently but firmly guided an elderly woman carrying groceries back into her building. The street was being cleared. The perimeter was being secured. A man in a darker suit, clearly the leader of this particular squadron, walked towards Evelyn's building. He stopped at the front door, a dented, pale blue slab of wood, and looked up. His eyes, shielded by sunglasses, seemed to find her window instantly. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, a signal. The screeching of tires had been the overture. The heavy, synchronized thud of boots on concrete was the chorus. And now, the thunder of those same boots, marching up the crumbling, concrete stairs of her building, was the climax approaching. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway, a percussive drumbeat of doom. It was the sound of a military invasion of a domestic suburban outpost. Evelyn watched the scene unfold with the detached interest of a nature documentary viewer. She saw the men on the street, the sealed perimeter, the fear in her neighbor's eyes. She saw the leader of the group at her door, his massive form filling the grimy, frosted glass panel. She let the curtain fall back into place. Her head tilted, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She walked back to her kitchen table and picked up her notepad. She opened it to a fresh page and wrote, Date, 30 days post-incident. Time, 8:27 a.m. Event, unauthorized street lockdown. Estimated inconvenience to residents, 20 minutes. Estimated loss of property value due to intimidation, negligible. She was taking a note. She was documenting. The footsteps stopped outside her door. A moment of silence, pregnant with menace, hung in the air. It was the calm before the inevitable storm. Evelyn clicked her pen and slipped it back into her satchel. The door didn't knock. It didn't rattle. It simply ceased to exist. The cheap, hollow-core wooden slab exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a single, brutal kick from a heavy, gleaming black Oxford shoe. The door flew across the room, splintered and broken, and crashed against the far wall, leaving a deep gouge in the plaster. The deadbolt, still locked, was now a twisted piece of metal attached to the frame, which had been ripped cleanly from the wall. A cloud of cheap, white drywall dust filled the air. And then he was there. Silas stepped into the tiny living room, and the space seemed to shrink around him. He was a mountain of tailored black wool, a monolith of pure, oppressive power. His presence was a physical weight that pressed down on the air. The low, ambient hum of the city outside was silenced by the sheer force of his aura. He radiated a suffocating, lethal alpha energy that made the very molecules in the room vibrate with fear. It was the kind of primal, predatory presence that made small animals freeze and larger ones flee. He was flanked by 3 of his massive lieutenants, who filled the doorway behind him, their expressions a mask of cold, professional menace. The hallway behind them was a sea of black suits, the pack members standing in silent, intimidating rows. Silas's golden eyes swept the room. It was a shoebox of a space, a threadbare couch, a small TV on a milk crate, a stack of financial textbooks, a potted plant that was, by all accounts, on its last legs. And there, in the middle of it all, standing next to a 2-seater kitchen table, was Evelyn. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater and sensible gray slacks. Her anti-blue light glasses were perched on her nose. Her glossy, dark hair was pulled back in a neat, practical ponytail. She looked like a librarian on her day off. She looked completely, utterly unimpressed by the destruction of her front door. The silence stretched. It was a loaded silence, one that Silas was used to controlling. It was the silence of a terrified subject awaiting their alpha's judgment. Evelyn broke it. She extended her hand, her fingers curling into a familiar gesture, and picked up her calculator. It was a small, silver, solar-powered machine, the weapon of choice for a junior auditor. She held it up, her hazel eyes meeting his golden ones without a flicker of fear. She pressed a button, and the mechanical click of the key was startlingly loud in the tense quiet. She looked at the display, then back at the ruined door, hanging from a single, twisted hinge. Then she looked at Silas. Her voice was calm, level, and crisp as a winter morning. "Unauthorized entry," she stated. "Property damage. Door replacement and associated labor. Estimated $250. She pressed another button on her calculator. Click. New total, including late fee, is now $6,675.45. Silas stared at her. His jaw, a sharp, hard line of bone, was tight. A muscle in his cheek ticked. The sheer, monumental audacity of the moment seemed to hang in the air between them. He had just kicked down her door, brought an army to her doorstep, and she was updating her invoice. "You," he snarled, the word a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in his chest. "You sent me a bill." "Yes," she confirmed, her tone as flat as the buttons on her calculator. 30 days ago. I sent you a bill. You failed to pay it. I sent you a second bill. A final notice." She gestured with her head towards the envelope on the table. "I was just about to mail it. Now you've added another cost to your liability." The air in the room was thick. The three lieutenants behind Silas exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated horror. They had seen their AlphaKing kill for far less. They had seen him tear men apart for a minor disrespect. This human was not just disrespecting him. She was treating him like a delinquent tenant. Silas took a step closer. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, his golden eyes blazing. The pressure in the room intensified. The potted plant on the windowsill began to wilt, its leaves curling. He was unleashing the full, suffocating weight of his dominance. It was a psychic assault, designed to break a mind, to force a submission. "I am not a debtor," he growled, his breath hot against her face. "I am the AlphaKing of the West Coast. I am the law. I am the order. You do not send me a notice." Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She felt the pressure, the invisible hand of his will pressing down on her, but it was like trying to push a train through a brick wall. Her mind was a fortress. Her will was a ledger. She was unbendable. She looked him directly in the eyes, her gaze clear and unwavering. "The law, Mr. Blackwood," she stated, her voice quiet but firm, "does not recognize AlphaKings. It recognizes property damage, unauthorized demolition, and breached contracts." She paused, letting the words land. "You are a liability, a significant one, and you have now compounded that liability by destroying my private property." She tapped her calculator again. "Shall I add the cost of the emotional distress from having my morning routine interrupted by a tactical invasion? Or would you prefer to simply pay the outstanding balance?" A low, rumbling sound escaped Silas's chest. It was a sound of pure, frustrated fury. The vein in his temple was throbbing. For a moment, the civilized mask slipped, and the beast beneath it was visible in his eyes. A feral, untamed predator, ready to tear something apart. But the woman before him remained a statue. He straightened up, rolling his shoulders. The movement was a tectonic shift. He looked around the tiny room again, this time with a different kind of attention. He saw the neatness, the order. He saw the stack of business cards, the well-thumbed copy of financial accounting standards. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible scent of her. It was a pleasant, clean scent of lavender and paper. The fear was still absent. It was utterly, infuriatingly absent. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket. His lieutenants tensed. They expected a weapon. Silas never reached for anything but a weapon. He pulled out a checkbook, a black, leather-bound checkbook. He held it up, letting the absurdity of the object speak for itself. Then, he placed it on her small kitchen table, beside the final notice invoice. "One check," he growled. One payment. For your window, for your phone, for your time. He paused, his golden eyes boring into her. And then we are going to talk. Evelyn looked at the checkbook. Then she looked up at him. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of something, triumph, passed through her eyes. It was there and gone in a second. One check, she agreed, her voice as calm as ever. For the total of $6,675.45. Then you will leave my apartment and refrain from any further unauthorized demolitions. She pulled the checkbook towards her, opened it to the first blank page, and looked at him expectantly. Please make it out to Keller Price and Associates. Attention, Evelyn Hartley. Silas stood there, frozen, looking down at this tiny woman who had just made a supreme AlphaKing sign a check for a latte and a broken door. The rage was still there, a low simmer in his veins, but it was now mixed with something else, a grudging, bewildered respect. He picked up the pen. He wrote out the amount in his sharp, bold scrawl. He signed his name. He tore the check out with a clean, decisive rip and held it out to her. She took it, examining it with the critical eye of a cashier. This is acceptable, she stated, folding it and placing it in her own satchel. Thank you for your prompt payment, despite the delay. She looked at the ruined door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to make a phone call to a locksmith, and I will be sending you the invoice for the door. Silas stared at her for another long, hard moment. Then, a sound escaped his lips. It was a low, dark chuckle. It was not a sound of anger, but of pure, unadulterated amusement. Evelyn Hartley, he said, her name a slow, deliberate caress on his tongue. I like your style. Before she could respond, he turned and walked out of the apartment. The pack parted for him like the Red Sea. His lieutenants scrambled to follow. The heavy boots echoed in the hallway once more, this time receding. Evelyn stood alone in the sudden silence of her apartment, the dust still settling around her. She looked at the empty doorway, the splintered wood, the gouged wall. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the check. She smiled, a small, private, deeply satisfied smile. Then she pulled out her notepad and wrote, New line item, unauthorized door removal and emergency replacement, $250. Sent invoice to Silas Blackwood, care of Obsidian Holdings. She dropped the notepad back into her satchel and picked up her phone. The day was still young. There was work to be done, and a new debtor to track. The heavy, aggressive thud of the crumpled paper invoice being slammed onto the cheap coffee table rattled the loose change in Evelyn's ceramic bowl. The sound was sharp, percussive, a declaration of war in a living room that had already seen too much action for 1 week. Silas loomed over her. His massive frame blocked the weak morning light filtering through the thin curtains, casting her entirely in his shadow. He had returned, unannounced and uninvited, his fury palpable in the air like static electricity before a lightning strike. The door had been replaced, a fresh slab of hollow wood that now stood defiantly in the frame, but Silas had simply walked through it, as if it were air. The lock was still intact. He had opened it. The audacity was breathtaking. His hands were planted on either side of her, caging her against the small desk she used for her home office. His knuckles were white, his massive arms straining against the fabric of his suit jacket. The veins in his forearms were pronounced, a roadmap of raw, barely contained power. He was close, too close. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell the expensive cologne and the wild, dangerous scent beneath it. You, he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that vibrated through her very bones. You have a death wish. His golden eyes were blazing, twin suns of fury locked onto her. You know what I am. You saw what I did to that rogue, and you sent me a bill. You sent me a second bill. You charged me a late fee. And now you are charging me for a door I kicked down because you were too stubborn to answer my calls. Evelyn remained perfectly still. Her posture was ramrod straight, her hands resting calmly on the edge of her desk. She looked up at him. her hazel eyes clear and unblinking behind her anti-blue light glasses. The fury radiating from him was like a physical force, a hurricane of rage, but she sat at the eye of the storm, utterly serene. "I don't answer unknown numbers," she stated, her voice flat and level. "And you never left a voicemail. Standard business protocol, Mr. Blackwood. If you want a response, you follow the proper channels." Silas's jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek was a frantic pulse. His breath was coming in short, sharp bursts, each exhale a puff of barely restrained violence. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers, his lips pulling back to reveal a hint of sharp, gleaming canines. "I will ask you one more time," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you have a death wish, Evelyn Hartley? Do you understand what it means to bill a monster?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't lean back. She met his gaze without a flicker of fear. She reached out, her hand moving with practiced precision, and picked up her silver calculator from the corner of her desk. She pressed a button. The mechanical click was a sharp, defiant sound. "Intimidation does not waive late fees, Mr. Blackwood," she stated calmly. "It simply adds to the cost of doing business." She tapped a few more buttons, her fingers moving with the speed of a concert pianist. The calculator beeped softly. "Door replacement, $250. That is the cost of the new door and the locksmith's expedited service." She tapped again. "Late fee for the original invoice, 5% on the first 30-day period. That was $305.97. But now, with your unannounced visit, we have trespassing and additional emotional distress. I'm adding a flat fee of $100 for the inconvenience of having my workday interrupted by an unauthorized intrusion." She looked at the display, then back up at him. "Your outstanding balance, including the new door and the additional administrative charges, is now $928.81. Silas stared at her. The growl in his chest deepened, a rumbling, primal sound of pure frustration. He had threatened her. He had cornered her. He had unleashed the full, terrifying weight of his presence upon her, and she had responded by updating her invoice. He was the supreme AlphaKing of the West Coast. He could rip her apart with his bare hands. He could command armies, and this woman was treating him like a parking ticket. A sound escaped him. It was a low, dark, rumbling laugh. It started in his chest, a vibration that shook his shoulders, and then it spilled out, a sound of pure, unrestrained amusement. It was a laugh that was entirely at odds with the situation, a laugh that spoke of a predator who had found the most confounding, infuriating, and utterly fascinating prey. His hands lifted from the desk. He straightened up to his full height, rolling his shoulders, the tension in his frame easing into something almost relaxed. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket. His fingers emerged, holding a single, solid metal object. It was a card. A black card. Not the standard, glossy plastic of a premium credit card. This was forged from a single piece of solid black titanium, its surface matte and cold, with his name embossed in silver lettering. There was no bank logo, no account number, no expiration date, just his name, Silas Blackwood. It was a statement of pure, unadulterated wealth, a card with no limit, a card that could buy continents. He tossed it onto the coffee table. The heavy metal clattered against the cheap wood, a sound of profound financial power colliding with the mundane. "Here," he said, his voice now a low, amused purr. "Buy yourself a new life, a new apartment, a new city." He gestured expansively around the cramped, cluttered space. "This place is a shoebox. You clearly have no taste, no ambition, and no sense of self-preservation. So take the card. Buy something. Anything." His eyes glittered with cold arrogance. "I consider it a gift. A severance. You are fired from being my auditor." Evelyn looked at the card. Her gaze was analytical, appraising. She saw the material, the weight, the lack of standard formatting. She saw a potential liability, She saw a tax implication. She saw a man trying to buy his way out of a legally binding obligation. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she turned away from him, towards the bottom drawer of her desk. The drawer squeaked as she opened it. She rummaged inside, her hand moving with the familiarity of a woman who knew exactly where everything was. She pulled out a small, white device. It was sleek, modern, and clearly expensive. A portable, wireless POS card reader. She placed it on the desk, next to her calculator. She plugged it in, and a small green light blinked to life. She looked up at Silas, her expression completely deadpan. "I don't need a new life, Mr. Blackwood," she stated. "I need payment. The balance is $928.81. We will settle the cleaning bill first. Then, we can discuss asset acquisition." Silas's jaw dropped, literally. His mouth fell open, his golden eyes widening in disbelief. He stared at the POS machine, then at her, then back at the machine. It was the most absurd, most incomprehensible thing he had ever witnessed. He had just offered her a limitless black card, a key to a world of unimaginable luxury, and she had pulled out a credit card machine to demand payment for a door. "You," he started, his voice a strangled rasp. "You are refusing the card?" "I am not refusing anything," Evelyn corrected, her tone crisp. "I am prioritizing. The invoice comes first. After the outstanding balance is paid, we can discuss the card and the implied corporate acquisition offer. But first, you owe me $928.81. She tapped the POS machine. "Credit or debit?" The silence that followed was deafening. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Silas stared at her, his mind racing. He had faced down rival alphas, survived assassination attempts, and commanded the loyalty of thousands of wolves through sheer force of will. He had never, in his entire existence, been asked for his payment method while trying to buy someone's life. He felt a laugh building in his chest again. It was a different laugh this time, a laugh of genuine, bewildered fascination. It was not the cold, predatory laugh of a hunter. It was the warm, rumbling laugh of a man who had just met his match. He picked up the black card from the coffee table. He looked at it, then back at her. He walked towards her desk, his heavy boots thudding against the cheap floorboards. He held the card out to her, his fingers brushing against the reader. "Fine," he growled, but there was no heat in it. "Swipe the card, settle the invoice, and then we are going to have a conversation." Evelyn looked at him. For a moment, a flicker of something, curiosity, surprise, passed through her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual cool professionalism. She took the card, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, electric. She swiped the card through the reader. A soft beep. A few seconds of processing. The machine spit out a receipt. She tore it off and handed it to him. "Thank you for your payment, Mr. Blackwood," she stated. "The invoice is now settled. Your account is current." Silas took the receipt, crumpling it in his fist. He looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face for any crack in the facade. He found nothing but calm, unshakable resolve. "You," he said slowly, his voice a low, husky murmur, "are the most dangerous woman I have ever met." Evelyn blinked. "I am a junior auditor. My primary weapon is a calculator." "No," Silas said, shaking his head. "Your primary weapon is that you don't give a damn. You saw me kill a rogue. You saw my lieutenants. You saw what I am. And you still treated me like a bad tenant." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the edge of her desk, his face close to hers. "Tell me, Evelyn, what would it take to get you to care? What would it take to make you blink?" Evelyn looked at him. She held his gaze for a long, steady moment. Then, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was not a smile of warmth or amusement. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "A 1099 form," she stated, "properly filled out and submitted to the IRS. That would get my attention." Silas stared at her. Then he laughed. It was a loud, booming, full-bodied laugh that filled the tiny apartment and rattled the windows. It was a laugh of genuine, helpless amusement. He had been bested. He had been outmaneuvered. And for the first time in a very long time, he was having fun. He straightened up and picked his black card off the reader, pocketing it with a fluid, elegant motion. He looked around the tiny apartment one more time, his eyes lingering on the neat stacks of papers, the orderly kitchen, the woman who stood at the center of it all like a queen in her castle. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and warm. "You know that, don't you? You've just made yourself the most interesting person in the world to me." Evelyn tilted her head. "I am not interested in being interesting. I am interested in completing this audit and moving on to my next client." "Tough," Silas said, grinning. "Because I'm your next client." He turned and walked towards the door, pausing at the threshold. He looked back at her, his golden eyes glowing with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "I have a problem, Evelyn. A big one. And I need an auditor who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. You're hired." Before she could respond, he stepped out of the apartment, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Evelyn alone in the sudden silence. She stood there for a long moment, the POS machine still buzzing softly on her desk. She looked at the receipt. She looked at the spot where Silas had stood. She felt a strange, unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She pushed it down. She was an auditor. She did not feel flutters. She felt numbers and compliance. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing up a new invoice. Subject line: Consulting Retainer, Obsidian Holdings, AlphaKing Financial Oversight. The flutter, she decided, was indigestion. Evelyn was in the middle of calculating the compound interest on a delinquent client account when the world tilted violently. One moment she was seated at her desk, fingers poised over her mechanical keyboard. The next she was airborne, her stomach lurching as she was effortlessly hoisted over a massive, muscular shoulder. The breath left her lungs in a sharp, indignant huff. Her anti-blue light glasses flew from her face, clattering against the floorboards. Her notepad, her pen, her calculator, all of the sacred tools of her trade, scattered like shrapnel from a bomb. She was upside down, staring at the worn beige carpet of her apartment, her vision swimming as blood rushed to her head. "Mr. Blackwood," she stated, her voice muffled against the expensive wool of his suit jacket, "this is an unauthorized physical removal. It constitutes assault and false imprisonment." Silas's response was a low, rumbling chuckle. The sound vibrated through his broad back, a deep, amused purr that did nothing to placate her. His massive arm was locked around her thighs, holding her in place with an iron grip. He was carrying her as if she weighed nothing, a sack of potatoes to be delivered to a new location. "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm with amusement, "I need you to see something. And you weren't answering your phone." "Because I was working," she snapped, her hands bracing against his back. "This is a clear violation of my personal space and a direct threat to my productivity." He strode through her apartment, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. The door was already open. His lieutenants stood in the hallway, their jaws slack, their eyes wide with disbelief. They watched their AlphaKing carry a tiny, struggling human woman out of her apartment, like a caveman claiming his prize. One of them, a lean, scarred man named Vance, stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. "AlphaKing, sir, is she... do you want us to?" Silas shot him a look. It was a single, sharp glance of molten gold, and Vance immediately shut his mouth, stepping back as if he'd been burned. "She's coming with us," Silas stated. "We have a job site. We need an expert." Evelyn, upside down and utterly indignant, twisted her head to glare at the man carrying her. "I am a financial auditor, not a construction inspector. If you require an expert, I suggest you consult a licensed general contractor." "You audit chaos, don't you?" Silas replied, his voice light. That's what I need. Chaos audited. He carried her down the crumbling stairs, past the terrified neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle, and out onto the street. The 10 black SUVs were still there, a wall of military-grade intimidation. Silas walked towards the lead vehicle, a massive armored behemoth with tinted windows and a hood that gleamed like polished obsidian. One of his men, a hulking beta with a shaved head, opened the rear door. Silas unceremoniously dumped Evelyn onto the plush leather back seat. She landed with a soft thud, her hair a wild tangle around her face, her sensible gray slacks askew. She immediately scrambled to right herself, her hands smoothing down her sweater, her eyes blazing with a cold, professional fury. My glasses, she snapped, holding out her hand. They are a necessary tool for my work. Without them, I cannot read fine print. This is a productivity disaster. Silas produced her glasses from his jacket pocket. He had picked them up. He had thought to bring them. He placed them gently in her outstretched palm, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was brief, but it was deliberate. I told you, he said, his voice low and intimate. I have a problem. You're going to help me solve it. He slid into the seat beside her, his massive frame taking up an obscene amount of space. He closed the door, and the vehicle roared to life. The engine was a deep, throaty growl, a sound of immense, contained power. The other SUVs fell into formation, a convoy of menace roaring through the streets of Cresthaven. Evelyn put her glasses on, adjusting them with a sharp, irritated motion. She pulled her notepad out of her satchel. Thankfully, she had managed to grab it before being abducted, and began writing. Date, current date. Time, current time. Incident, forcible removal from residence. Location, 213 Oak Street, apartment 2B. Perpetrator, Silas Blackwood. Witnesses, multiple. Estimated lost billable hours, 3 hours. She paused, tapping her pen against the page. Addendum, emotional distress. Calculate at rate of $100 per hour for unauthorized kidnapping. Silas watched her write, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across his face. You're taking notes. I am documenting a violation of my civil rights, Evelyn corrected, and calculating the associated costs. The drive was swift and aggressive. The SUVs weaved through traffic with a terrifying precision, drivers who were clearly accustomed to breaking every traffic law in existence. Evelyn held onto the leather seat, her knuckles white, her face a mask of controlled irritation. After 20 minutes of a high-speed chase through the city, the convoy screeched to a halt in a desolate industrial district. The buildings were crumbling, the windows broken, the streets littered with debris. It was a no-man's land, a place where the city's laws had long since given way to something more primal. Silas stepped out of the vehicle and, before Evelyn could protest, hauled her out after him. He set her on her feet, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment too long. She immediately stepped back, brushing the wrinkles from her sweater. Where are we? She asked, her eyes scanning the devastation. The warehouse before them was a monument to destruction. The front wall was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble and twisted metal. The roof had partially collapsed, exposing the steel beams to the gray sky. Smoke rose from the wreckage, a thin, acrid plume that smelled of charred concrete and burnt rubber. The ground was a minefield of debris, broken glass, and scattered shell casings. Inside the cavernous space, the remnants of a turf war were on full display. Rival werewolves, some unconscious, some groaning in pain, were scattered across the concrete floor. They were a motley crew of leather jackets and torn clothes, their wolfish features partially visible through shredded skin and matted fur. They were being guarded by Silas's men, a line of black-suited enforcers who stood with their arms crossed, their expressions grim and unyielding. Silas gestured expansively at the carnage. "Welcome to the West Coast Pack's latest acquisition," he said, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "A prime piece of commercial real estate. Just needs a little renovation." Evelyn looked at the destruction. She looked at the blood. She looked at the rival wolves. She looked at the structural damage. Her face remained completely, utterly neutral. Silas stepped closer, his golden eyes blazing. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "If you're so good at math," he challenged, his voice a low, dangerous purr, "audit my destruction." Evelyn tilted her head. She looked at the collapsed wall, the smoke, the debris. Then she looked back at him, her lips parted. "This," she stated, her voice flat and cold, "is an unmitigated disaster." Silas blinked, the smug grin on his face faltered. "Excuse me?" "This property," Evelyn continued, stepping past him and walking into the wreckage. She navigated the debris with surprising grace, her heels clicking against the concrete. What was it? A distribution center? A manufacturing plant? The layout suggests a large, open floor plan with high ceilings. That's valuable. That's marketable. She pointed at the collapsed front wall. "You used brute force. Explosives, if I'm not mistaken. The blast pattern is inconsistent. You didn't just destroy the wall. You compromised the structural integrity of the entire building." She turned to look at him, her eyes sharp and analytical. "Do you see that crack running up the load-bearing column?" Silas followed her gaze. There was indeed a crack, a long, jagged fissure that spiderwebbed up the massive steel beam. He frowned. "The load-bearing column," Evelyn repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "It is literally the most important structural element in this building. Without it, the roof collapses. Without the roof, the building is condemned. Without the building, you have a vacant lot." She pulled out her notepad and began scribbling furiously. "Do you know how much a commercial lot in this district is worth? Approximately $1.2 million. Do you know how much a standing, functional warehouse is worth? Approximately $4.5 million. She looked up at him. "You destroyed $3.3 million in resale value with a single, ill-advised demolition. That is not conquest. That is fiscal malpractice." The silence that followed was absolute. The pack members, both Silas's men and the captive rivals, stared at the small, bespectacled woman who was scolding the supreme AlphaKing with the ferocity of a schoolteacher. Their faces were a mix of disbelief, horror, and outright terror. They were waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for Silas to tear her apart. Silas didn't move. He stared at her, his golden eyes unblinking. A muscle in his jaw ticked. Evelyn continued, her voice rising with righteous fury. "And this is not just a real estate nightmare. This is a tax nightmare. Obsidian Holdings owns this property, correct? Then you are liable for the environmental impact. The smoke, the debris, the chemical runoff from your explosives. That is a regulatory violation. The EPA will fine you. The city will fine you. You will need permits for the demolition, permits for the cleanup, permits for the reconstruction. That's thousands of dollars in bureaucratic fees alone." She tapped her notepad. "And then there's the insurance. You destroyed a building you own. You're not covered for intentional damage. You'll have to pay for all of this out of pocket. That's a significant hit to your liquid assets." She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with professional indignation. "Next time, Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you use controlled demolition. A team of specialists. A well-planned, precisely executed, sequential collapse that minimizes collateral damage and maximizes structural salvage. That is how a competent leader manages a property acquisition. Not this." She gestured at the wreckage. "This is amateur hour. This is a caveman's solution to a modern problem." Silas stared at her. The silence stretched, a taut wire of tension. His lieutenants were frozen, their eyes wide, their hands trembling at their sides. Vance, the scarred lieutenant, actually took a step back, as if bracing for the explosion. Silas stepped forward. He moved slowly, deliberately, his heavy boots echoing in the cavernous space. The pack parted for him, a wave of terrified wolves clearing a path. He walked towards Evelyn, his massive frame blocking out the light. Evelyn didn't step back. She held her ground, her notepad still in hand, her pen still poised. She looked up at him, her gaze steady and unblinking. He stopped inches away from her. He was close, too close. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the wild, dangerous scent of him. His golden eyes bored into hers, searching for something. Fear, submission, a crack in her armor. He found nothing. A low, rumbling sound escaped his chest. It was not a growl. It was a laugh. A deep, warm, genuine laugh that filled the warehouse and echoed off the crumbling walls. His bodyguards exchanged bewildered glances. They had seen their AlphaKing angry. They had seen him violent. They had never seen him laugh like this. Silas reached out. His hand, massive and calloused, cupped her chin. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his gaze. His touch was gentle, almost tender. But his eyes were blazing with something else, something primal, something possessive. "You," he said, his voice a low, husky murmur, "are the most magnificent creature I have ever encountered." Evelyn blinked. Her heart traitorously skipped a beat. She forced herself to remain still, to maintain her professional composure. "I am an auditor, Mr. Blackwood," she stated. "I am not a creature, and I am not magnificent. I am efficient." Silas's smile widened. His thumb traced a slow, deliberate line across her jaw. "Efficient," he repeated, savoring the word. "That's what I like about you, Evelyn. You don't waste time. You don't waste energy. You don't waste anything." He stepped back, his hand dropping from her face. He turned to look at the wreckage of his conquest, his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. "Fix it," he said, gesturing at the ruined warehouse. "Audit my destruction. Tell me what I did wrong, and how to do it right. That's your new job." Evelyn straightened her glasses. "My fee is $150 an hour for forensic financial analysis, plus a $500 consultation retainer. And I require a written contract." Silas turned back to her, his golden eyes gleaming. "You'll get your contract," he said, "and you'll get your retainer. And you'll get anything else you want, Evelyn Hartley." He stepped closer again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "All you have to do is ask." Evelyn looked up at him. She felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. She pushed it down. She was an auditor. She did not feel warmth. She felt compliance and regulatory standards. "I want a copy of your tax returns from the last 5 years," she stated, "and a detailed inventory of all Obsidian Holdings fixed assets." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed through the ruined warehouse. "Done," he said, his voice warm with amusement. "You can have anything you want." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. He led her out of the warehouse, past the stunned bodyguards and the groaning prisoners, towards the waiting SUV. Evelyn allowed herself to be led. She was, after all, on the clock. The quiet hum of a private elevator arriving at the top floor was a sound of profound, almost celestial luxury. It was the whisper of perfectly engineered machinery, the soft sigh of hydraulics, the gentle chime of a system designed to transport only the most elite individuals to the most exclusive spaces. Evelyn stood in the center of the car, her sensible heels planted firmly on the polished marble floor, her satchel clutched to her chest like a shield. The doors slid open with a breathless whisper, revealing a space that was less an apartment and more a monument to opulent power. The penthouse of Obsidian Holdings was a cathedral of glass and steel, a sprawling expanse of open-plan luxury that seemed to float above the city of Cresthaven. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, a glittering tapestry of lights and shadows that stretched to the horizon. The furniture was all sharp angles and dark leather, strategically placed to maximize the breathtaking vista. The air smelled of expensive cologne, polished wood, and something wild and untamed. Silas stepped out of the elevator first, his massive frame moving with a predator's grace. He walked towards a central seating area, a collection of sleek, modular sofas arranged around a low obsidian glass table. He gestured for her to follow, his golden eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and anticipation. "Welcome to my office," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "Make yourself at home. I promise not to bill you for the view." Evelyn stepped out of the elevator, her eyes sweeping the space with a critical, analytical gaze. She saw the cost of the furnishings, the rarity of the materials, the sheer, staggering expense of maintaining such a space. She saw a potential liability. She saw a tax write-off. "I am not here to enjoy the view, Mr. Blackwood," she stated, her voice crisp. "I am here to discuss the terms of my employment." "Where is the contract?" Silas's grin widened. He loved the way she spoke, the way she cut through the pleasantries and got straight to business. It was infuriating and intoxicating in equal measure. He walked to the obsidian glass table and picked up a thick, leather-bound folder. He held it out to her, his fingers brushing against hers as she took it. "It's all there," he said. "Triple your current market salary. Full medical, dental, and vision. A company car, though I suspect you'll prefer to walk. An expense account with no limit. And a signing bonus that will make your head spin." Evelyn took the folder, her fingers tracing the embossed lettering on the cover. She opened it, her eyes scanning the dense, legalese-laden text. She flipped through the pages with the speed of a woman who had read 1,000 contracts. She paused at the section detailing her benefits, her lips pursing in concentration. $350,000 annual base salary, she read aloud. Performance-based bonuses, equity options, a private office. She paused, her eyes narrowing. The workspace designation is listed as penthouse level, Silas's private suite. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes sharp and unyielding. "Mr. Blackwood, I am a professional auditor. My workspace is my office, not your bedroom." Silas's grin didn't falter. If anything, it widened. He stepped closer, his massive frame filling her peripheral vision. "The penthouse has multiple rooms, Evelyn. I have a study, a library, a gym, a wine cellar." He paused, his voice dropping to a low, intimate purr. "And a bedroom. The designated workspace is the entire floor. You can set up your desk wherever you like, even in my bedroom, if that's what you prefer." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She adjusted her glasses, a habitual gesture that did nothing to hide the faint flush creeping up her neck. "I will require a separate designated office space. Neutral territory, no personal items, no ambush audits at 3 a.m. Silas laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floor. "No ambush audits, I promise." He stepped even closer, trapping her between his massive frame and the cold, unyielding glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. His hands planted on either side of her, caging her against the panoramic view of the city below. "But I make no promises about personal items." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She was surrounded by him, engulfed by his presence. The heat of his body was a tangible force, a wall of warmth and raw power. She could smell the cedar and ozone of him, could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart through the inches of space between them. "This is not appropriate," she stated, her voice a controlled, level monotone. "I am an employee. You are my employer. This is a conflict of interest." Silas leaned in closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "You are not an employee, Evelyn. You are my mate." His voice was a low, possessive growl. "I have spent the last month watching you, investigating you, becoming utterly, hopelessly obsessed with you, and I have come to a decision." He straightened up, looking down at her with blazing golden eyes. "You are not going to be my chief damage assessor. You are not going to be my financial director." He reached out, his fingers cupping her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "You are going to be my mate, my partner, the woman who tells me when I'm wrong and makes me want to do better." Evelyn stared up at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. Her mind, that fortress of logic and numbers, was screaming at her to step away. to reassert her professional boundaries. But her body, traitorous and warm, was leaning into his touch. "I am not an asset to be acquired," she said, her voice a trembling whisper. "I am an auditor. I audit numbers. I do not audit relationships." Silas chuckled, a low, dark sound of pure amusement. "You already audited my destruction. You audited my real estate. You audited my temper. Now you're going to audit my heart." He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, a sleek, silver fountain pen, custom-made, clearly worth more than her monthly rent, and pressed it into her hand. "Sign the contract, Evelyn. Sign it, and I'll give you everything you ever wanted." Evelyn looked at the pen, then at the contract, then back at him. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, a profound, life-altering choice that seemed to hang in the air like a delicate glass thread. "You cannot just claim me," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of its usual sharpness. "This is not a corporate acquisition. This is not a hostile takeover. You cannot simply corner me against a window and demand that I sign away my autonomy." Silas's eyes softened. He reached out, his massive hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing a slow, tender line along her cheekbone. "I am not demanding, Evelyn. I am asking." His voice was a low, husky murmur. "I am asking you to take a chance on me. On us. I am asking you to stop auditing everything and start living." Evelyn's resolve, that ironclad wall of professional detachment, began to crack. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the raw, desperate hope beneath the mask of power and control. She felt the warmth of his hand on her face, the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. She looked down at the contract, her eyes scanning the final page. The salary, the benefits, the signing bonus. And then, at the very bottom, a handwritten line in Silas's bold, sharp scrawl. "In perpetuity, non-negotiable, my heart, my soul, my empire, and every single penny I own." She felt a laugh building in her chest, a small, surprised chuckle that escaped her lips before she could stop it. "You wrote this yourself, didn't you? You didn't even let your lawyers draft it?" Silas grinned, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "My lawyers refused. They said it was legally inadvisable and romantically ill-advised and a clear conflict of interest. I fired them." Evelyn shook her head, a genuine smile spreading across her face. It was a rare, beautiful sight, a crack in the facade of the cold, professional auditor. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes warm and soft. "Fine," she said, her voice a quiet whisper. "I'll sign your contract." Silas's grin widened into a full, radiant smile. He grabbed the pen from her hand and, before she could react, tilted her chin up and claimed her lips in a fierce, devastating kiss. The world seemed to stop. The city lights blurred outside the window. The hum of the penthouse faded away, and there was only the press of his lips against hers, the warmth of his body, the taste of him. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated possession, a claiming that went beyond words and contracts. Evelyn's hands flew up, her fingers tangling in his dark, tousled hair. She kissed him back, a fierce, desperate need that surprised them both. It was not a polite, professional kiss. It was a kiss of fire and hunger, a meeting of equals who had finally found their match. Silas pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You," he growled, his voice raw and husky, "are the most infuriating, brilliant, impossible woman I have ever met. And I am never letting you go." Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears and unspoken emotions. "I am not a possession, Mr. Blackwood. I am an asset. And assets require management." Silas laughed, a loud, joyful sound that echoed through the penthouse. "Then manage me, Evelyn. I am your asset. I am your liability. I am your project." He stepped back, gesturing at the vast, luxurious space around them. "This is yours. Everything is yours. You just have to sign the contract." Evelyn looked at the contract, still clutched in her trembling hand. She felt the weight of the pen, the warmth of his body, the depth of his gaze. She looked up at him, her heart full of a strange, unfamiliar joy. "I'll need a copy of the employee handbook," she stated, her voice regaining a fraction of its cool professionalism, "and a detailed breakdown of the company's financial structure, and a quarterly performance review." Silas grinned, a wolfish, predatory smile. "You'll get everything you want, I promise." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. She felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart, the warmth of his body, the strength of his embrace. She felt safe, cherished, and utterly, completely claimed. "I love you, Evelyn Hartley," he whispered into her hair. "I love your spreadsheets. I love your calculators. I love the way you can make a supreme AlphaKing tremble with a single glance." Evelyn buried her face in his chest, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Blackwood, but I still expect you to pay your late fees." Silas laughed, a warm, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest. "I'll pay them," he promised. "I'll pay them every single day for the rest of my life." He lifted her chin, his golden eyes meeting hers. "That's a lifetime contract, Evelyn. Non-negotiable." Evelyn looked up at him, her heart full of a fierce, unyielding love. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The city sparkled below them, a blanket of lights and shadows. The penthouse hummed with warmth and possibility. And in the heart of it all, two people who had started as adversaries had found something far more precious than a signed contract. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't raw strength or fear, but the unbreakable standard of a woman who simply refuses to settle for less than what she's owed. If you enjoyed this clash between hardcore corporate auditing and a grumpy Supreme Alpha, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. If an AlphaKing destroyed your favorite coffee shop, what would be the first item on the invoice you send him?